morning, everyone. That's going to sound a little muffled because of the mask situation, but we're being forced by the county attorney to follow our own advice. So here we go. This is the meeting notice and agenda for a regular session and an executive session of the Yuma County Board of Supervisors. We'll also be sitting as all special taxing districts. This is the June 1st, 2020, 9 a.m. meeting. This is the call to order. I'm going to move the executive session to the end of the meeting. So we're going to go straight into, wait a minute. Where is the, there you go, the Pledge of Allegiance. We're going to skip all the executive session items and move right into the Pledge of Allegiance. Will everybody please stand up and join us on the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led this morning by Supervisor McLeod.
Thank you, sir. Please join me. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, as you can tell, we're all wearing masks, which some people may consider an improvement. So we're going to move on to call to the public. And call to the public is held for the public benefit to allow individuals to address issues within the board's jurisdiction. Board members may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to Arizona revised statutes, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to criticism, or scheduling the matter for further discussion and a decision at a future date. Anyone who's concerned about COVID-19 and does not want to be put into an open setting can submit an email call to the public statement at publiccomment@yumacountyaz.gov. These email forms of public comment will be accepted until 8 a.m. the morning of the meeting. All public comments will be read out loud during the Yuma County Board of Supervisors meeting that starts at 9 a.m. All right, does anybody in the public want to address the board? Or is there a written statement that we need to hear? Okay, go ahead, Christy.
This is from Mary Caldera. My concern is over the numbers of COVID-19 deaths reported to the health department. The numbers of deaths seem very low considering the number of patients in the hospital and the number of positive tests. Are people with COVID-19 who die as a result of organ failure or respiratory failure being counted in the numbers? Accurate numbers are important for planning purposes.
Okay, we will pass that on to the Yuma County Health Director and have her address that concern directly. I think that there's an explanation. I mean, even I, sometimes when I look at the number of deaths and see that they don't match the hospital number of deaths, have some questions about why, but I'm sure that there's an answer for that. And, what happens is we try to put as much information as possible, but, there's so many different angles that people look at these things from. So we'll let the Public Health Director answer that question, okay? Anybody else? If not, I'll leave the call to the public item open till the end of the meeting and move on to the presentation, proclamations, and appointments. I don't think we have any proclamations or appointments today. So I'll move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar, the following items listed upon the consent agenda, under the consent agenda, will be considered as a group and acted upon by one motion with no separate discussion, unless a board member so requests. In that event, the item will be removed from the consent calendar for separate discussion and action. Are there any items to be pulled out of the consent items? There are items 1 through 17, I think. Yeah, 17.
I'd like to pull number 17.
Number 17. Okay, that's one item. If nobody wants to pull any of these items out, I'll entertain a motion to approve a consent calendar items 1 through 17, to 17, with the exception of 17.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the consent calendar 1 through 16 as presented.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Motion carries. The next item in the agenda is item 17. It's a consent item. It's been asked to be pulled from the agenda. So the library district is to acknowledge the receipt of $20,000, a donation to the Yuma County Free Library District from Shelley A. Critchlow for Violet Nidifer. Nidifer. So I suppose
Mr.
that you
Chairman,
just want to acknowledge.
I just pulled it to acknowledge the gift, Mr. Chairman, from Michelle A. Critchlow for Violet Nidifer. So I just wanted to acknowledge their generous gift.
And
With that, Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the item as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Just before we go on to vote, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that, you know, when we talk about the free library district, we're talking about a district, and that there's a lot of people, a lot of volunteers that take part of that. I mean, I wish at some particular point in time we could acknowledge their contributions, because they certainly make the library the operation that it is. So I want to take the opportunity to thank them. If there is no more discussion, all those in favor of the motion to approve item 17 as presented signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries, takes care of the consent items. And we do have to sit as the Housing Governing Board. Is Mrs. Mrs. Sparsa here?
Yeah.
Oh, there she is. I didn't see you. It's all the mask thing, you know. So how do we do this? Do we want her to sit in the middle here maybe, or, you know, or
She can
sit over
come
there where
sit.
she's at, or? Pásale para acá, véngase, véngase.
Mr. Chairman, she could stay there and participate as long as she's able, if she has, or move a chair closer, however you want. But she's still in the building and she's
Put it
still.
right there. It's okay. She's wearing a mask, and Lynn's wearing a mask.
Come on up. We'll put a chair up here for you. Okay.
And thanks for coming. I mean,
Yes.
we missed you last time. Okay, so we're now meeting as the Housing Governing Board, and we have a consent calendar. The following items listed under the consent agenda will be considered as a group and acted upon by one motion with no separate discussion unless a board member so requests. In that event, the item will be removed from the consent calendar for separate discussion and action. There's two items on the consent calendar. One is a housing public hearing to allow the public to comment on the Yuma County Housing Department Capital Funds Program Annual Plan for fiscal year 2020 and the Capital Fund Program 5-year action plan for 2020-24. How do we allow public comment on a consent item? I mean,
just open them all at the same time, but you can allow, yeah.
it's a little weird.
You
But,
want to do a public hearing.
you know, if you're going to do a public hearing, you're going to have to open up the item on his own, probably. Adopt and authorize the chairman to sign resolution number 2020-18 approving the Yuma County Housing Department Capital Fund Program Annual Plan for fiscal year 2020 and the 5-year action plan for 2020-2024 and related agreements with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And we do this every year. It's kind of like the process that has to be followed so that HUD will accept our plan. It requires that we take this plan up to the public and allow for public comment on the plan. It is pretty much the same as it was last year with minor changes. If there are any changes that, you know, that we want to listen to, I'm sure that Mr. Roldan, he's got a sister, Solano, that gets me all confused, but so Roldan can come up if you want to. I'm going to open these items to public comment, to a public hearing, and I'm going to open both of them at the same time. I don't think it works for us not to have an open hearing as a consent item. So I'm opening up the public hearing on item number 1. Is there anyone in the public that would like to address the board? Are there any comments from the board to the director, housing director? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing and get back to the board for their decision. Remember, this is on the consent calendar, so actually we can take both those items at the same time with the motion to approve as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve items 1 and 2 for the Housing Governing Board as presented. Any discussion on the item? No discussion. All those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? The motion carries. So thank you very much. You know, I was going to say the check's in the mail, but thank you.
Thank you.
We then move on to the planning and zoning agenda. The planning and zoning agenda, full legal descriptions of property sites for all rezoning cases are available for public review at the Yuma County Board of Supervisors office. There are different kinds of rezoning cases. We have expedited rezoning and public hearing. And we have, I think there's 2 items on the expedited rezoning. These items will be open as a group for public hearing and acted upon by one motion to adopt the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission, except for any item that is removed by a board member for separate consideration. That item will be discussed and acted upon separately following actions on expedited items. There are two expedited rezoning items. If the board is in agreement, we can open up both of them as expedited and just have a public hearing and move on. Is that okay? Okay, so, okay, so we're gonna take both of them, and the way we'll do it is I'll open both of them items 1 and 2, and we'll open a public hearing for both of them at the same time. This is the public hearing. Anybody wants to address the board can do so right now. I remind everyone that if you're ahead of the game, you stay ahead of the game. Nobody? Good. I'm closing the public hearing and taking these items as two individual items. I'll entertain a motion to approve both of them as presented or as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Is there a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Then motion and second to approve item 1 and 2 of the expedited rezoning agenda. We open up both of them. We had a public hearing on both of them, and so now it's the time for approval. I know you guys were ready to make a big presentation, but I think we could do this. There's been a motion and a second to approve the items as presented. Any discussion on the item? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries, and that takes care of those two items. And we'll then go on to discussion and action items that are actually opened by the board, and we will discuss them separately and have a discussion as appropriate. The first one is Development Services, Planning and Zoning Division, Southern Sky Subdivision, modifications of subdivision regulations. Jacobs Companies request 5 modifications from the Yuma County subdivision regulations for the proposed Southern Sky subdivision consisting of 300 residential lots on 69.86 acres, zone recreational vehicle subdivision, and assessors parcels number 198-17-009 and 010, located east of Fortuna Road and south of 40th Street, Yuma, Arizona. We will get a PowerPoint presentation, and I want to welcome Bruce Jacobson. I haven't seen him in a long time. Nice to see you, sir. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fernando Villegas, Senior Planner, presenting this request for modifications. The developer requesting 5 modifications to the Yuma County subdivision regulations. The modification number 1, as you can see, the developer requesting blocks lengths of 1,318 feet. Blocks are not allowed to have more than 1,200 linear feet in length. The engineering department recommends approval of this request since this request only exceeds the requirement by 118 feet. The developer shall install traffic calming measures to reduce the speed throughout the residential subdivision. The next slide here shows the subdivision with the blocks longer than 1,200 feet. Modification number 2 is requested by the developer to construct 20-foot chamfers. 25 by 25 chamfers are required. The engineering department recommends approval of this request for internal streets only, not for Fortuna Road, 44th Street, and Scaldale Drive. Next slide showed where the engineering department recommends approval of this request. Modification number 3, it requested by the developer not to provide street lights along Fortuna Road. The engineering department recommends approval of this request because Fortuna Road was downgraded to a major collector, and major collector streets are not required to provide street lights. The next slide shows the location of Fortuna Road. Modification number 4, the request by the developer not to provide street calming measures are required. The engineering department recommends denial of this request. The traffic calming measures are required on blocks longer than 1,200 feet. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommends approval of this request. However, the developer has agreed to install the traffic calming measures in the subdivision. So modification number 4 is not really needed.
Okay.
The next slide shows where the traffic calming devices are required. And the last modification is requested by the developer that to construct sidewalks throughout the development. The engineering department recommends denial of this request. The staff received many complaints from residents regarding the lack of sidewalks in the foothills. So that's why we're recommending the developer to construct the sidewalks along the subdivision except for Tuna Road only. The next slide here shows where the sidewalks are required. The Planning and Zoning Commission is recommending approval of modifications 1 through 4 and denial of modification number 5. This concludes the staff presentation. Any questions for staff, engineering department, or the applicant?
Have you had discussions with the applicant about the recommendations?
Yes.
Does he still want them? Oh, well, I guess we can ask him when he comes
Yes,
up.
we have agreed. For example, modification number 4, it seems that it's not longer needed.
Okay. Well, some of them are easy because you agree with them, but the ones that require some discussion. Okay, all right, let me open up.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Thank you. Fernando,
Yes.
Of all of those roads, the busiest one would be Fortuna. Why not have sidewalks on Fortuna where
Well,
it's got major traffic?
Outside.
according to the engineering department, those sidewalks will be constructed when
the
the
street.
properties in front of Fortuna Road get developed. Right now, the developer is just leaving a separation from Fortuna Road to the subdivision for commercial development.
Commercial.
The
Yes.
buffer zone in the middle.
So
That's
those
why.
sidewalks will be built at the time of development, yes.
Thank you.
All right. There are 5 of them. And again, any more questions from staff before we open it to the public hearing? Thank you. Sit in the side there and let us take on. I'll open the public hearing for this item. Is a representative of the developer or anyone in the public wants to address the board on this item?
The question about,
You need your name and address, and especially with the mask on.
Can't tell who
you want me to take this off?
Yeah, yeah.
could
We
be
don't know if
anybody.
it's you, Bruce.
It's me,
It's you. Yeah.
Bruce Jacobson at 1334 South Fifth Avenue here in Yuma. The calming devices, we would, instead of doing the big plates and stuff, we'd probably do some of those
You're talking
things
about the
that-
traffic.
to slow the traffic
slow-
down a little
Yeah,
bit.
the traffic.
And we'll work with your people in engineering to put down that. The one request that we had that was denied was regarding sidewalks. We want to put in the sidewalks, but when it's required, they have to post assurances. And if we go in and put in the sidewalks and then they get broken, then you have to put them all back in again. And so what we'd like to do is make it to the place that we could work out something to where we cannot have a certificate of occupancy on the house until the sidewalk is put in, and do it that way. Now, they've indicated that there's something that we could work out, but I'm not sure what that is.
Is there something we can work out?
This is not an uncommon problem here in the desert. The city of San Luis, and I'm sure the city of Somerton had the same issues. I mean, you build the sidewalks, and then when you're building the house, the big big concrete truck goes over the sidewalk, breaks the sidewalks up, and you have to replace it. It's very common. On top of that, on the compaction and extract, it gets hot in the day, it gets cooler at night, the compression. Then the sidewalks start going up. It's really difficult in the desert. The flip side of that is that if you don't put in a sidewalk now, people who live there will be walking in portions of sidewalk and then on dirt and then portions of sidewalk and then on dirt until it's all filled up, which is exactly what the city of San Luis, for example, has gone through, and they've now required sidewalks, and people have to, if they break them, they have to repair them. It's just a difficult thing here in the desert. I still remember, I've been in development for a long time. I still remember when we used to be able to put them in when you put the house in, or we'd put a curve and then we'd try to do something like that. It's just become very difficult to find some sort of middle ground on this. I hope the engineering department has come up with something better. Go ahead.
Alvarez Engineering Department. I spoke with the developer, with Raul, regarding this issue regarding the sidewalks. We can work out not a contract, but an agreement with the developer where they'll put in the road improvements as required by the subdivision regulations, and then leave the sidewalks at the end we'll separate the two assurances. So that way they don't have to
Build
have
them
the
right
1-year
away.
warranty and so
But
forth.
there will be money to
Yes.
basically
yes.
do it in case it's needed.
Yeah,
We have too many
there's
complaints.
there's options we can go.
All right. So the issue was that they couldn't get a final unless they built the sidewalks or posted assurances. So what you're saying is that they will be required to post separate assurances for the sidewalk that can be used in case, for some reason, there's too many complaints about the spaces in between. The county can step up and say, okay, look, there you posted assurances, use them. And so that leaves the decision of when to put those sidewalks, not only in the developer when he's going through the process of selling those properties, but also on the county if they get too many complaints and they don't have to come to the Board of Supervisors for resolution, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Are you in agreement with that, Bruce?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, what else?
Do you have any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Sure.
I drove out there, and it's going to be a beautiful subdivision out there. It's going to, Scottsdale, going along Scottsdale, and it has that buffer with the solar panels. So that's going to be a nice little subdivision out there, isn't it? So,
We think so.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
so
I know.
too.
I know we're going to move into the districts, which is something that cities, again, have used for some time, but the county is slow in creating them this way, where you have them for almost everything but the kitchen sink in them. I mean, now we're building subdivisions and putting all these improvement districts in place right at the time that you develop, as opposed to trying to get all the residents to agree to be assessed for something like street lighting and things like that, which is the main issues up there are the sidewalks and the streets and the maintenance of the retention basins, which become a difficult issue later on. So I'm somewhat happy. I've never been a fan of improvement districts, with some exclusions. But I see them now as a part of development now. You have to create them, otherwise you won't get your subdivision approved, because it's so simple, right? People who create the demand should pay for it. That's the way it's looked at now. Anyway, we're going to move into that next, so I should leave that comment for later. I promise not to repeat it again. Okay, so we have item number 1, which is the modification of subdivision regulations. Thank you, Bruce. We had a public hearing. Does anybody else want to address the board? If not, I'm going to return this to the board for their decision. And from what I gather, the biggest issue was the sidewalks, and I think that a deal has been cut. An agreement has been a deal has been cut. An agreement has been made between the developer and the county to address that issue without it becoming a problem for the recording of the subdivision. So the rest of the modifications are technically, I suppose, accepted by the developer, which means the Schaefer's situation was accepted, the sidewalk we dealt with, the length of the block walls. Every issue that we've had was already discussed, and I guess the developer's in agreement with all of them. All right, I'll entertain a motion to go ahead and approve the items as presented with the amendment of the sidewalk agreement.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Been motion and second to approve item number 1 as presented with the addendum to it regarding the sidewalks.
Why did you put that all together?
Okay, all those in favor, wait a minute. Any more discussion? Not. All those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? This is what happens when you breathe your own hair through the mask a lot. You start to, hyperventilate. Can't get used to it. I'm okay. I'm just kidding. Wait a minute. 2-minute break. I gotta take some cup. Okay, we're back. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
All right. The next item, still about the same thing, is just the creation of all the improvement districts. So Public Works, the next item is, as the Board of Supervisors, is to accept the petition to form a county improvement district for Purple Mountain Ranch subdivision for landscape maintenance pursuant to Arizona revised statutes. In accordance with Arizona revised statutes, also declare the Purple Mountain Ranch Improvement District formed to be known as the Yuma County Improvement District, Improvement District 2019-03, and authorize the chairman to sign the order of establishment of the district. C, to accept the petition to incur expense providing for maintenance of district improvements, establish a new fund number for future budgetary needs, and to authorize and direct staff to negotiate and contract with a landscape contractor for future landscape maintenance within the district. That would be item number 2. And again, I think we had briefly addressed the issue of creating these improvement districts while the subdivisions are created, as opposed to trying to create them afterwards, requiring the signature of 51%, I think, of the landowners. So what we're doing here is creating an improvement district to handle the expenses of the maintenance expenses and those kind of, at this particular time, we're talking about landscape maintenance, right?
Correct, for, future maintenance
We have a
needs.
lighting district next to them, right?
That's the second one, yes.
The second one. Okay, so everybody understands the purpose? Any questions from Rachel before I open it up to the public? No? I hereby open the item to public hearing. Anybody in the public that would like to address the board? If not, I'll take it back to the board for their decision. So the item has got A, B, C, D, and E. So if you make a motion, you will be making a motion to accept the petition to create the improvement district, accept the petition to incur expenses, establish a new fund number, and authorize and direct staff to negotiate a contract with the landscape contractor. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and second to approve item number 2 as presented. Any more discussion? If no more discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. And we move on to number 3, which is another petition, and this will be to accept the petition to form a street lighting district within Purple Mountain Ranch subdivision to be known as the Purple Mountain Ranch Street Lighting District, and to authorize the chairman to sign a formal order of establishment for Purple Mountain Ranch Street Lighting District, to establish a fund number, to direct staff to negotiate and contract with Arizona Public Service for the street lighting within the proposed district, and authorize the chairman to sign the APS lighting contract upon receipt and review by legal counsel. This is again the formation of another district. This is for the street lighting cost and maintenance. Normally this is done by APS. APS will give you a cost estimate. You agree to it. They'll install the lights and charge you so much a month for their actual. Beg your pardon?
Nothing.
Oh, so let me open this to the public, just in case. So we have I open this item to the public. Anyone in the public that wants to address the board on this, the formation of this district, please step forward. If you are outside, please come in.
Mr. Chair and Rachel, I have one question.
Yes,
How long does the APS charge you for those lights?
forever,
Forever.
Forever. Okay.
because they put up the poles and they put the infrastructure in. In this case,
And
the
do they
developer is
maintain
going to
it?
be putting in the poles normally, but in that way, the lighting is cheaper for the residents within that subdivision. Anymore, APS will not contract with you to establish everything that's needed to be done within the lighting district. So the developers always do that, and all we do is contract for the lighting anymore.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Any more? I'm
Mr.
closing the
Chair,
public hearing,
Rachel, I
going
have
back to
one
the board.
thing. Mr. Chair,
Mhm.
is it part of their APS bill or is it? Or
No,
is
it's
it
part of their
separate?
tax bill.
It's part of their tax bill.
Got it. Okay. I knew that. Okay.
They bill monthly,
Uh-huh.
and then finance
What you-
pays those bills.
Yeah, that's why you created lighting district. to be able to
Yes, sir.
pay that.
I
All right,
just wanted
yes,
to-
sure.
So the poles will be owned by the county?
No, idea.
No, actually, the poles are gonna be owned by APS because they'll come in, even though the developer's putting in the poles and everything, APS will be coming to repair them, and that's what's being paid for under contract.
Basically, Supervisor Borges.
Planning them.
Truly, yes.
I thought it was the other way around. If the developer puts them in, it's owned by the county or a city, whichever the district, however the district, improvement district is formed. Because they charge $25
Per pole,
per pole,
per month.
monthly, and plus the CPS or energy bill.
In this case, Supervisor Porteous, the county will not own the poles. They will be owned by APS. The developer is putting them in on behalf of APS right at the get-go, so
Yeah,
that they don't have to come back later and do that construction.
yep. It's, the APS keeps getting bigger, because we keep adding more
I know.
infrastructure for them.
Exactly.
All right, yeah, well,
In the long run, it's cheaper for the taxpayer.
That is correct.
When the developer buys them.
yeah, in
Uh-huh.
the short run.
Because they'll be paying that rent forever.
That's true.
Yeah, at one particular time, I was inclined to try to put in solar power poles, but then it became a maintenance issue. Once the batteries for the solar power, start weakening, then who takes care of them? And it became a big issue, at least for me, back some time ago.
That's
APS
interesting.
has got to
Yeah.
be. All right, okay, any more questions?
Better.
I think I closed the public
Thank
hearing,
you.
didn't I? Well, I'm closing the public hearing now, just in case. Anybody else? No? Okay, I entertain a motion by the board to approve the creation of the street lighting district and the other 4 items as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion and second to approve item number 3 as presented.
Chairman Reyes?
Yes?
Excuse me, who made the motion?
Supervisor Simmons made the
Thank
motion.
you.
The masked bandit to my left. And Supervisor Porteous second the motion. All right, okay. All those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries, and we move on to County Administration Special Taxing Districts, a special session to discuss an action of the Yuma County fiscal year 2020-21 tentative budget, provide direction to staff regarding revisions to the 2021 budget, and adopt the tentative budget for fiscal year 2020-21, and set the date and time for a combined public hearing on the tentative budget and the truth and taxation as Monday, June 22nd, 2020 at 9 a.m. Now, I asked for an amendment, right? And I want to put it into this discussion. So I'm opening up, what's it called? It's called
Addendum number 1.
addendum number 1. So addendum number 2 is the election, right? And addendum number 1 is, I'm opening up addendum number 1, which is county administration discussion and possible action regarding to Arizona CARES fund allocation of $7,017,666. Who came up with 666 at the end here? Somebody should have thought that. To Yuma County and its relationship to the tentative budget for fiscal year 2020-21. I asked that this item be added as an addendum because my feeling was that the county attorney might have some problems if we started to discuss the disposition of these funds just as a budget item as opposed to an item that needed to be posted. So to cover all our bases, we decided to post it as an addendum, but I am sort of fusing it into the discussion on the budget because I feel it's going to have to be discussed within that context to be able to accept whatever or give directions on how we expect that to go. So, do you guys have a budget up there, the one we approved, the one we pre-approved, excuse me, I shouldn't have said that because then the paper picks it up and says we already approved the budget, so no. We had a couple of items that were pending, a couple of a couple of items that weren't in the tentative budget that we were supposed to take a look at. I think it was something that the assessor brought out, with some solar refunds that we had to give up. And I guess there was something else. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Right,
but-
we do have the tentative budget to present today.
Okay.
Also related to addendum number 1, if we're going to combine those discussions, there is a handout. It's called addendum number 1 handout, AZ Cares Fund Certification Form. It says attachment B. We'll need to have, the county attorney's advising that the board would authorize me to sign this certification in order to be able to access the AZ Cares Fund from the $7 million. So if you would, as part of your motions at the end of our presentations, would
Okay.
move to approve that.
Okay, when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll make sure that it's included as part of the motion.
Thank you.
Okay, so start the presentation.
Grab the click. So good morning, Chairman Reyes and members of the board. I'm pleased to provide an overview of the tentative budget. And I'm doing this presentation a little bit more formally because the members of the public may or may not have seen the initial budget presentation with the recommended. We will refer to the changes from the recommended to the tentative budget during this conversation. The staff has worked very hard. All the directors, all of the agency heads and elected officials have worked hard to make this happen. And I want to acknowledge and thank them for their work. So again, we identified a number of goals going into the budget year, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. First, we take a baseline approach, looking at every expenditure from the ground up. We carefully examine requests from departments and agencies focused on the high priority needs. And in light of COVID-19 uncertain revenues, we're not able to recommend as many requests as we could normally have done out of an abundance of caution for future revenue uncertainties. So the tentative budget also takes into account the need to closely monitor revenues in order to authorize major spending commitments. Funding for some major items is being sequestered until late December or early January to ensure sufficient revenues are coming in to be able to afford the expenditures. These include some salary adjustments, major equipment, vehicles, and some capital outlay. Our budget includes funding for all current positions. It also includes salary increases of a half step, or roughly 1% for all pay plans, in addition to a half step for anniversary date increases for eligible employees. Due to the efforts of the Yuma County Employees Benefit Trust Board, health insurance premiums rates are remaining flat with no increase in employee premiums. There is the planned 1.5% shift from 37.5% to 39% for the employee share of dependent premiums. The tentative budget is responsible and balanced and remains flexible and adaptable to future changes. As mentioned earlier, this process has been more challenging than any previous budgets going back to the Great Recession. This is due to the COVID-19 health emergency and related actions that closed schools, restricted travel, and shut down most businesses and retailers across the state. The governor's stay-at-home executive order was put in place in March and then was rescinded in mid-May, and a new order relaxed some restrictions for some parts of the economy. But all of this has resulted in reduced revenue for the state and the county. Property tax, state shared tax, and county sales tax are the county's top 3 revenue sources. The impact on our future revenue picture is unknown. Receipts for sales tax lagged by 2 months, so we won't even know the impact of the shutdown on April's revenues until mid-June. Even so, there are obligations that we have the responsibility to address. These are required increases for state pension plans, capital investment for essential technology replacement, debt service obligations, maintenance of effort support to districts, grant matching, and subsidies, and vehicle replacement, which is being recommended to be sequestered until January 1st and dependent on sufficient revenues. This chart summarizes all funds for which the county is responsible, showing the tentative budget for next year compared with the current year's budget. I want to especially recognize the jail district fund because we've talked about concerns with the fund balance, but I wanted to acknowledge that the sheriff runs a very efficient operation. The jail district assists the general fund in a number of ways, and as the sheriff mentioned during the budget discussions with the board, the jail has never charged a per-day housing fee for the inmates that are going through the Restoration to Competency program that we call RTC. Over the years, this equates to savings of about $2.4 million to the general fund, so I want to acknowledge and thank the sheriff for that service and his partnership. Our major fund is the general fund. Revenue categories are shown here, and the largest three revenue sources are at the top, as mentioned earlier, TPT, which is county sales tax, state shared sales tax, and county property tax. The change from the current adopted budget to next year's tentative budget is 0.45%. The general fund uses are categorized as expenditures, which include personnel and related expenses, supplies and services, vehicles, equipment, and contingencies, transfers out to other funds, and reserves or fund balance. The tentative budget fund balance is 20.34%, which is keeping with the board's adopted fund balance policy of at least 20% of total uses in fund balance.
Give me a minute. Give me a minute. Back up a little bit to the prior.
Before this?
Yeah, before this one. What is the other? I mean, I know indirect cost, but other, is it the transfer from the emergency, from the reserve? The $7 million.
Ask.
Hill. We have indirect costs, we have auto and loop, Hill. I mean, those are revenues, but what is other? I see transfers.
DDS.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Gil Villegas, CFO. Usually we encompass all the others for the other activities or other revenue sources that we have in the general fund. Short for services, other intergovernmental revenue grants that we get in the general fund. It's all the other miscellaneous rents that we receive.
So fees. Is it fees?
Fees, licenses, grants that we get from the state, which we don't get a lot in the general fund. All the other minor categories per se.
Okay, so where would the additional funds that we took from the reserve account be? Just in everything in there?
From the reserve, every time that we take money from the reserve, from the contingency, it goes to the appropriation line item. So it goes to the expenditure line item.
Not the revenue.
Not the revenue.
Okay, I get it. All right. I thought that might have something to do with it, and it just went by. It's okay. Thank you.
So during the budget process, the budget review team carefully scrutinized requests for new positions for next fiscal year. More than 13 positions were requested. The tentative budget includes a net increase of 5.375 positions across all funds compared to the current year. The biggest change from recommended to tentative is the board's approval of 2 sheriff's deputies along with their vehicles and equipment. As you can see here, this is the detail of the staffing changes. The changes from recommended to tentative are shown in bold. These include a reduction of 1 office technician requested by the school superintendent's office and the 2 sheriff's deputies added by the board. This chart shows the detail of the funding related to the staffing changes from the previous slide. So here are the changes from the recommended to tentative summarized. As you can see, the Board of Supervisors reduced the tax rate by 2.06 cents, delayed the additional set aside of $500,000 to the Fleet Management Fund, and added 2 sheriff's deputies, associated vehicles, and equipment. The board also approved additional overtime for the medical examiner, as well as the exceptional incentive funding for up to 10% of employees in each department. The budget review team also added the statutorily required amount of funding needed for a constable in Precinct 3 should one be elected for the first time this fall. So a recap of the general fund capital projects is shown here. There are 4 ongoing projects and only 1 new project in the tentative budget. The tentative budget includes ongoing and 3 new projects in special revenue funds. These affect the Health District, Highway User Revenue Fund, Housing Department, and Flood Control District. The Board of Supervisors has approved a reduction of 2.06 cents in the property rate for all funds. So the tax rate for the general fund tentative budget is now $2.5082. The library recommendation and the tentative budget shows a reduction of 0.0037 in the library district debt service and an increase of that same amount for library district operations, netting out to the same overall rate. And the tentative budget includes the same tax rate as the current year for flood control. As reported by the assessor, county net assessed values increased by an average of 3.48% for fiscal year 2021, and new construction decreased by almost $10 million. The reduction is due to the change in valuation for solar facilities as a result of lawsuits and legislative changes. This slide shows the current year adopted levy and the tax rate and the tentative levy and tax rate. So the adopted from this current year is $31,440,775 at the tax rate of 2.5288, and the tentative levy is $32,269,307 at the new rate of 2.5082. This chart shows the property tax levy over the past 18 years as compared to the allowable levy. As you can see, the board has adopted a levy well below the allowable amount for the last 9 years. Yuma County's median home value is $163,000. If a home's value remains the same, there will be a $3.36 reduction in the homeowner's county taxes.
Do we ever do an estimate on the commercial side?
Yes, we do have a spreadsheet that Gil has created. We can provide that to the board. I've shared that with the Chamber of Commerce, and they thought it was very helpful. So we'll provide that to you as well, and the Chamber.
Thanks.
So this concludes the overview of the county's tentative budget for 2021. The board is being asked to discuss and provide any final changes to the tentative budget and adopt the tentative budget today. The next step will be June 22nd, when the board will conduct a combined budget hearing and truth and taxation hearing and adopt the final budget. Gil Villegas is here and available to go through any changes, as well as Tony Struck and Lucia Gomez from our Office of Management and Budget, to address any other changes the board would like to consider and to make any other accommodations prior to adoption. I will tell you that there was an additional piece of information provided by the county assessor on a late breaking result of the lawsuit, which is another $700,000 of decreased revenue for the general fund. So that is not accommodated in the tentative budget. So, and it will hit us next year, but it came in like late last week. So we don't have that incorporated. We do have the $321,000 reduction that Mr. Worley brought forward during our last meeting. And it does not also include, this tentative budget does not include the AWC reduction. So the AWC reduction is $116,000, and then this new reduction from Agua Caliente is $703,000. So those are two big factors that we'll have to take into consideration. And that concludes the tentative budget presentation.
Okay. Just wanted to ask a question to tie everything in, and that has to do with the $7 million. You know, I mean, I suppose nothing comes without strings attached. So the first question that I would have, it's really a two-item question. First of all, it's a technicality, but do we have to include the $7 million in our budget now to be able to spend it next year? That would be the first one, because I think that for us to spend anything, once we approve a tentative budget, it needs to be part of a budget. Otherwise, it can't be spent. That's the first thing. The second thing is obviously what sort of expenses can be covered by this, and that would help determine what is truly unrestricted funds from what it is, from the restrictions, and really how much money we have from that fund to be able to balance this budget, this next year's budget.
I'll let Gil take a
stab, Gil.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I've been involved with this COVID-19 AC CARES Act. The way it's being characterized, the $7 million is a grant from the state or past due grant from the federal government. As such, once we had confirmation that those monies are going to be available to us, we can come before the board and establish a new fund. As a matter of fact, that's the recommendation from the Office of the Auditor General, and there's a recommendation, I think, from law as well, that we establish a separate fund for all these funds that we're going to be receiving. So we're going through the application process right now. We're submitting our budget. We're submitting all the requirements that we need to do. Once we get the award, once we get the approval, Most likely, we're going to be in front of the board again to establish a special revenue fund with the $7 million, and then we're going to start transferring the expenditures into that segregation of duties, so we don't commingle funds pretty much.
And we're getting frequently asked questions from the AZ Cares group at the governor's office, and the early indication is that the money needs to be used for salaries and EREs for public safety and health workers and 911 dispatchers. That's pretty much the restricted.
So it's a PPP type situation. It's a paycheck protection program type situation.
So the intent is for expenses that are happening in your general fund or in the health district fund are getting offset by this new funding, so that if you're paying the $7 million is being paid by this extra funding, then the $7 million that remains now in your budget can be used for any purpose.
Yeah, that in theory that may sound right, but I find it very difficult. Some of the rules. Hold on a minute, but some of the rules of the PPP require that you start paying from the moment you receive it. That's the rule. You can't backtrack and say, give me credit for, that many hours in March or April or May. The rule is that when you get it, then you start paying forward. So how is this going to work?
This is different.
Well,
this has its own rules. It is not a PPP program. It has its own rules.
It goes back to March 1st.
It begins in March 1st.
Yes, from March 1st.
So this is different than the PPP.
December 30th. Yes, it is different from the PPP. It's specifically geared to cities and counties.
The reimbursement program.
Needs, yes. So the intent is that it could end up being revenue replacement
or it can be used to, I don't want to use the word hazard pay, but it's going to come up. It's going to come up.
No, hazard pay is not allowed under the AZ Cares. Hazard pay is eligible for reimbursement under the FEMA funding.
Okay, so those are the strings that I'm talking about.
75%, right.
So the answer to the first question was that we would put this amount of grant, this grant amount, sort of an outside grant, and use that grant to subsidize some of the expenses that we had to incur because of COVID-19, thereby releasing those funds to be used in the general fund. Is that how you see it? Or how you see it, Gil? Because
Mr. Chairman,
I get it.
Operational in this grant, yes, that's the idea. To establish a separate fund and then start moving expenditures from the general fund for all of those that are eligible into this fund. Most of them are going to be from the general fund, therefore we're going to release, or we're not going to incur as much or as many expenditures in the general fund. We're going to have
so it cannot be, for example, a replacement of lost sales taxes.
Well, it's supposed to help the general fund with the loss of revenues as well. It's supposed to help the general fund with the operations. That's the intention, and that's what I have read through it so far.
Okay, so I'm going to stop right now and let Supervisor McLeod, before he takes off his mask, ask the next question.
Susan, the $700,000 that you referred to in solar, does that impact this budget that we're discussing, or does it impact the budget next year?
It will impact fiscal year 2021. So as of July 1, it will affect starting July 1.
So we have a $700,000 hole.
It'll be a refund to the taxpayer.
Okay, and so obviously we can fill that easily because of this $7 million, right?
Yeah, if we're spending $700,000 less on public safety pay because it's being paid out of this other fund, then we could use that $700,000 that we're not spending to offset the loss of that revenue.
And for the board's information, the intent of this $7 million is to be distributed out into the public. That's the intent.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The intent is to pay for salaries and EREs for public safety and health.
That's what it goes to. The intent is that then frees up $7 million in our budget to spend out in the public.
It's
as the
to
board
spend
would see
whatever
fit.
purpose is determined by the.
Technically, everything we
For
spend
instance-
goes out to the
For
public.
instance, what many of the cities are doing is they're going to do business grants, spend money on advertising for tourism to benefit those areas that thrive on tourism that have been hit so hard. They're going to spend that money on tourism. You need to understand what the intent of this money is for the CARES Act. It's not to balance our budget. The intent is for it to go out and benefit businesses and the communities.
All right.
That's what the intent is.
All right, let me just
What
back
about
up a
the
little
gift
bit and
clause?
say
Excuse me,
this.
Mr. Chair.
I get it, right? I get it. But I also get that the city of Yuma is going to get like $12 million. So to me, spending money duplicating something that somebody else is doing is really not a good idea. Now, if you want to talk about how we can help businesses outside city limits, in the 61,000 people that we have outside city limits, I can deal with that. That is something. So I would say that we have to, I just don't want it to, you know, when I read it in the paper, and which is maybe a mistake, but when I read in the paper that someone, the Mayor Prescott, says something like, well, we'd like to get these funds released so we can do these projects we haven't done in the past to sort of infuse some economic development in the community. I can understand what he's talking about, but that seems to me very difficult to comprehend when the rules are, you know, the Treasury guidelines would only be for payroll expenses, not overtime, for public health and safety employees. That's what this says. So that's what that particular use is. What you're saying is if we save some money by not paying this, we may want to direct some of this money to the public, to the private sector in form of grants or subsidies or assistance for economic development. Fortunately for us, we do have a gentleman that handles that, but I would say that that has to be in conjunction with the other municipalities. If we were to do that, we wouldn't be inventing the wheel. I wouldn't like to put together a county-wide program that simply duplicates what the city of Yuma or what the city of San Luis or Somerton are doing for their residents. I would like to think that what we'd like to help is people in Welton, or not Welton, people in Lake Martinez or places that haven't gotten that assistance. And that's going to get a little complicated. And that's one of the reasons why I ask, are there some strings attached? Because
No.
it seems to me,
What
there's strings
happens is
attached.
the money goes, what we would have been paying for sheriff's deputies and 911 call receivers, we don't have to expend that money now. This CARES grant is paying those salaries. Those salaries are in our budget. So it frees up all of the money in our budget to do something else with.
Okay.
That's how it works.
Well,
I
Go ahead.
would caution that our estimates of our revenues are just that, they're estimates, and we do not know if we're gonna meet our target revenues. If we don't meet our target revenues, then we don't have the money to spend on the things that are already in the budget, much less anything outside of the
got
budget
it.
currently. So
I think we need to find.
take a month, 5
I
months.
think we need to take a cautious approach about how we're going to do this. But I think that we need to find a balanced one that covers the residents, covers assistance to some of these businesses that are, you know, in dire straits, and at the same time serves to replace some of the lost revenue because of this crisis. I mean, you know, we need to find some balance. But the first question is, how do you put it in your budget? Do you put it in as and I think he'll answer that by saying we put it in as a grant that is dedicated for this, and then use it up as we see fit. But does that mean we add $7 million to the budget? Or does, you know, that was my question. Do you add 7 million without the 666 at the end? It looks pretty evil there, but, you know.
7,017,000.
Yeah, I get it.
Overall, the entire appropriation for Yuma County, in essence, that's what you're doing. You adding $7 million more.
Now, the second question is, what if you don't use it all? I mean, in other words, what if the cost of, you know, sheriff department, health department employees, you know, what if the cost isn't, you know, if you don't get to use it all, what happens to the remaining fund?
We do.
You give it back. You give it back.
We give it
But
back.
We've already, Gil has
That's
already
fine.
been calculating, and we've heard from the sheriff's office that for his salaries and EREs alone, it's about between $6 and $6.5 million between March 1st and December 30th.
Yeah.
So it basically
We'll use it all.
takes up almost the whole thing.
Just law
not county.
enforcement.
Just the sheriff's department.
That's fine.
not
No, no, no.
county.
I don't think we're gonna have a problem. I don't think we'll have money left over based on the eligible
Okay,
expenditure.
so that's the question I should have asked. You know, how does it look in terms of, you know, whether we'll be able to spend it all, and what happens if we don't? Because most of this funding that's came through, and my experience is with the PPP, right? And the PPP is pretty specific. Either you spend it in there, and if you don't spend it, you return it. You know, there is a time frame to spend it, 8 weeks, which now they're thinking of extending to, I don't know, 14 or 16 weeks. But what happened? Do you have a time frame to spend it?
No, not now. Because
December 30th.
No, there must be a time frame through December 30th. So it's to be spent during the first 6 months of the next fiscal year, basically, right?
No, Mr. Chairman.
No?
No, it's not correct.
Well, you can start
We'll spend that money,
retroactive to March 1st. So
But what's
March.
freed up in our budget
I get it.
can be spent even into next year.
Yeah.
That's the point. It's replacing dollars in our budget we would have spent, placing those dollars at our disposal to spend
Well,
whatever.
I
So we have until, 2024, if you wish. There is no time limit on the money that we save in our budget.
well, it's a yearly thing. I mean, we do budgets yearly.
Well, yeah, of course.
Mr. Chair,
Well, go ahead, Supervisor.
Mr. Chair, I want to hang on to it just for a little while and see where we're at, because there's some, we don't know what sales tax is going to be. We don't know the jail district how it's going to handle it. There's some things that we may need to use that for, to
But
offset.
Supervisor,
Easy.
we have to spend all of it right away on those salaries.
Yeah.
That frees up the money in the budget,
That's right.
spent however the board decides. So that money is there. It's not going away. We have to spend the 7 million in order to keep it.
Yeah, but
We
what,
have a
and
year.
I get that.
But we have a year
But
to be able to spend it.
what Supervisor Pancras is saying is, look, don't go crazy and spend the whole $7 million.
Of course.
You know, wait a little while to see what the actual impact is going to be of this COVID-19 economic emergency over time.
Thank you.
Just not go crazy and say, okay, well, we're going to spend the $7 million in 6 months or less.
Yes.
And therefore we have $7 million to spend on something else. That may not be necessarily what happens. And I understand that. I understand, Supervisor McLeod. Don't get frustrated. I understand that you're saying we don't have to. We just have to come up with a system to help, to help people who may need help out there. And I know that there's going to be people who may need help out there. So, you know, I think I said it at the beginning. What we need to do is come up with a balanced way or a balanced plan to spend as much as possible on helping the private sector come out of this situation. At the same time, understanding that our first priority is to make sure that the county finances are, you know, well run and sustainable. So we can find. I mean, what I wanted to say at the beginning is this is not free money to do anything. And although it may seem like it, because it would release some funds that you would spend on something else, you have to remember that this is done to help the county weather this situation. It's not necessarily done. I mean, the federal government is taking care of everybody else for a while anyway. And I understand that there's some things that are out there that may necessitate for us to be a little more cognizant of the fact that there's some people out there hurting, some businesses that are hurting, some individuals that are really hurting. So if the decision of the board is to put together a program to help businesses who are at the brink or who need some assistance, whether it's through a loan program, a grant program, or a thing like that, or whether we decide to spend money on food banks in providing some assistance to people who may be food insecure. You know, if we do that, that's fine, that's good, it's okay. I just want everybody to realize that we don't have to today come up with a plan to spend $7 million. What we need to do today is how do we plug that into our budget right now so that we can use it? That was the first question. So if it requires that it go into the contingency account, for example, so you'd have a $7 million contingency account, but it doesn't seem to be that way because it really doesn't become free until you use it for the purpose that is intended. Then after that, it's like a grant that becomes unrestricted after you use it, correct? Because I'm more accustomed to that. So you get a grant, you use it for the purpose it was intended to, and when it comes back to you, you can use it for other purposes. That's how I see this, right?
Yeah. And Mr. Chair, if we're going to help businesses if that's what we choose to do with it, then those businesses need to be in the unincorporated area.
That's correct.
Because the city of Welton, the city of San Luis, the city of Somerton, and the city of Yuma all have funds coming their way
Yeah,
as
well, that's what I said. I mean, it looks to me like, and I think that what we would be wise to do is to join forces with the other communities and actually have a task force that includes everyone, not just the city of Yuma, not just the city of San Luis, not just the city of Somerton or the city of Welton, but the county in general. And that we understand that the county funds that are coming here are coming into the county to deal with, I mean, they're so specific that they actually are based on population count, which means that the people who should benefit from those $7 million is people who live in unincorporated areas, not necessarily people who live in the city of Yuma or any of the cities. They have their own funds to deal with that. So although I agree that there is, and I'm sensitive to that, to helping the private sector, but I'm also sensitive to double dipping in that situation, and that's what we don't want to do. We want to take this thing cautiously. There is no such thing as free money. It comes with strings attached, and it has to be handled carefully. We certainly don't want to get into a situation where we spend it and then find out that we shouldn't have. So we're going to take a cautious approach to that. Supervisor McLeod.
Yeah, my suggestion would be that we put together a group of individuals from the private sector, economic development, county staff, that monitors and advises the board and gives recommendations for moving forward.
Got it. But they're not going to be people from the city of Yuma or from the city of Somerton or from the city of San Luis. They're going to have to be people from the unincorporated areas. That's the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is the city of Yuma has its own funds to help these people, the people that are within. Our job, our task with this money is to help people who live in the unincorporated areas. And so it's fine with me. We can create a task force to deal with this issue, but I'm going to be pretty adamant about the fact that this is to be used for unincorporated areas of Yuma County and not to be necessarily used for something within the city of San Luis or within the city of Somerton or within the city of Yuma or Welton. They have their own funds and they need to deal with it within the jurisdictions. That's how it was distributed. It was distributed based on the population count. If I remember correctly, the county has 61,000 people or something like that, and the city of Yuma had 98,000 or something like that, and they got 11 or 12 or 13 million dollars.
A little over 11.
So they have their own funds to deal with their own needs inside their own boundaries. We need to focus on the foothills. We need to focus on the areas that have businesses that aren't inside the city that need help, and there's going to be plenty of help needed in places like the foothills or Martinez Lake or some of these other entities.
Tacna, Dateland, yes.
And the Orange Grove area or whatever people are.
I don't think the board should be the ones. We'll make the final decision, but I think that there should be a group of people, that
I have no problem with
brings
that.
recommendations to the board, however you want to set that up.
Right. Okay. Well, like I said, I'm willing to listen to fine tune the situation. Right now, the money needs to be used for the purpose that it was set aside, and then after that, by then we ought to be able to set up some sort of mechanism that makes sense to you, to me, to the rest of the board, and how do we deal with the actual distribution of funds. Suffice it to say that we want to tell the residents of Yuma County that we don't intend to keep it. That's, I think, the best way to say it. We don't intend to keep it just to keep it and plug up holes in the county. We intend to make sure that we're careful about, if we need to replace funds that are supposed to be coming, we are going to be carefully looking at exactly how much money we actually can use. But I don't know about the rest of the board, but I am willing to take a look at a program that helps some of the private sector people who are struggling to come back from this crisis. And I'm sure that Supervisor Pancracio, Supervisor Porcius would tend to agree that what we need to do is proceed cautiously until we actually find out what the actual rules of this game is, and we actually find out and make sure what we need to do to make sure the county, runs its course, without being too badly damaged. I think that we worked on this budget. It's certainly a piece of good news, but at the end, sometimes, it comes with a certain set of rules and regulations that have to be abided by. And so I want to caution everybody, let's not start spending it too soon. All right?
I agree.
Okay, so now we're back to the budget process. I'm sorry about the question. I guess it was needed to be asked, but so we're getting back to the budget. Is this budget right now balanced? Does this budget include a method to use these funds?
Well, it goes towards salary.
We will set up a
Yeah, but
special
once-
revenue fund for that $7 million from the AZ CARES Act, and then it will be used to offset or to charge against those eligible expenses. The expenses in the general fund will be charged against that fund, so they wouldn't be charged against the general fund.
All right,
Right.
all right, that's okay, that's fine.
And Mr. Chairman?
But the question was, okay, let's just say that you used the $7 million and you used them for making payroll, for the sheriff department and the health department and anyone involved in the COVID situation, that you were able to set aside that. Once that money is spent and is released, in other words, it's released because you have another source for it, does that source have to be in the budget? Is what I'm trying to get at. Do we have to for example, put it in the contingency account and add $7 million to this? Because essentially it will be revenue. It becomes revenue once you spend it.
But it will be revenue in a special revenue fund. So the special revenue fund will have revenues, and we'll have an appropriation for expenditures of the same amount. So it'll be a special revenue fund that we charge against.
I guess the question can be answered simple. Do we have to add another $7 million to the budget or not?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the current budget does not include anything COVID-related 19 revenues. What is going to happen, it's a cash flow situation now. We're talking budget and we're talking actuals. Once we receive this money and once we move the expenditures to the proper special revenue fund for this $7 million, we're going to have a bigger fund balance at the end of the fiscal year, per se. Providing the revenues come in the way they are supposed to, whatever we did in our projections.
Okay.
So everything, it is to a certain extent included at the bottom line in our fund balance once, again, we move those expenditures to the special revenue fund, and that's going to be our beginning balance for the next fiscal year.
Are you talking about the next fiscal year being the 2020-21 or the 21-22?
2021.
All right, so it is going to be available, if freed, to be used during the next fiscal year.
Correct.
All
It
right.
also back pays the current fiscal year.
Yeah, I get it. It may not all be there, but, for the next
I
fiscal
need to
year.
emphasize what the county administrator just said, revenues. We still don't know how our revenues are doing for the current fiscal year. So it's not that you're going to see the $7 million at the beginning of the next fiscal year. We have to be cautious about that, and we need to take that into consideration.
So,
Chairman?
sure, Supervisor Clark.
I'd like to discuss something else. We got lucky, and the legislature ended early, thus limiting the damage that they can inflict on Yuma County and the others. That
You have
turned
a
up
state senator here.
a little over $500,000 that we budgeted for Altex, because they did not increase it up to over $1 million as projected. So I'd like to talk about moving that in our budget to the vehicle replacement fund.
And I like to leave it where it's at. I think that the legislature can move back in session at any time. I mean, that's the problem with the legislature, that can be called back in at any time. I'd say why-
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the governor is planning several special sessions.
Yeah, but the special session can only address what he calls them for.
Yes.
And
and
just go off
he
willy-nilly
can-
on
And he
new
can
bills,
call
and
it,
even.
and
if
he
they-
can call
even
it for
so, if we had to pull it back out of the vehicle replenishment fund, we could. But it was a great idea, the board agreed to it, and I think we should fund it since the funding is available.
That would be good, but let's just wait and see if they do a special
Fine.
session.
The staff already has direction that we're sequestering those funds until January, and if those funds get freed up, then that would be added to the vehicle
Yeah.
replacement. You did talk about that, and so we already have that direction to do that.
Okay.
All right.
We gotta agree on that.
Yeah, that's fine. That is fine. That's fine. He just wanted to make the point again, that we were lucky in some ways. We
Well,
don't know if that luck is going to last,
There you
especially,
go.
especially given things, the way things are right now. Anyway, so
They're
the
planning
point
lots
that
of
Supervisor
special
McLeod made is he reinforced the idea that if savings are made out of the Altec situation, that they be put into the replacement fund, vehicle replacement fund. Is that okay? I mean, it could be used to balance the budget someplace else, but, you know, I just want you to know that when that happens, if that happens, it comes back to the board for the final decision, okay?
Everything comes back in December, right? Once we know about our revenues.
Yeah, we'll be monitoring revenues and expenditures on a monthly basis, so we'll be.
Yeah, but December 31st, please. Okay, all right, so we have a tentative budget that seems to be balanced. It seems to have included everything that we can think of, other than the $700,000, which I think is something that we're gonna have to deal with next year. Is that correct, Assessor? All right, so any other questions, comments?
No, we would just ask that you would adopt the tentative budget, and then on the addendum side, that you would authorize me to sign the certification form for the AZ CARES funding.
Okay.
Oh,
Now,
Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question. Susan, how do we address the $700,000 hole? Do we need to put it in this budget, or is it just a refund that comes out of the general fund? How do we handle that?
It would be reflected in our property tax revenues not being less than what we budgeted by 700,000.
Right.
Unless we have better than budgeted collectibles or uncollectibles. So it would
We'll
just
take it
be,
from the 7
We
million.
don't need to deal with it today in this budget.
We're just kidding.
no, because you would be, if you want the tentative budget to be the maximum budget that you can authorize, you keep it the same way. You
Really?
keep it the same. So the revenues just won't come in as high as you anticipate.
Okay, you'll have
Unless
a
other things
revenue
happen where
shortfall.
they do, right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Joe Worley, Yuma County Assessor. On Saturday, I processed that roll correction. The treasurer processed it over the weekend. It's actually going to hit this current year's fiscal monies. So it's going to be less money that will come in through your allocation that you would get in this fiscal year.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's really going to affect your revenues in this fiscal year,
Got it.
not next fiscal year. So-
Thank you.
So
All right, thank you.
we had the
I don't
money
know if
on
you
hand
wanna-
already from second half collections, and that's why we wanted to process it.
I don't know if thanking you is good now, right now. It's not thank
Sorry.
you. Sorry, dude.
We're gonna miss
Yeah,
you.
thank you for the parting gift.
Couldn't you have miscalculated, Joe?
It wasn't a miscalculation.
No, I mean, the 700,000, you could have just
No,
moved a
I'm sorry.
decimal or something.
No, I'm sorry. It was 4 years worth of roll corrections. That's why it was so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you. No, thank you. Okay, so anyway, are we basically set on what we have as a budget for next year? Considering the fact that we don't really know what the situation is gonna be with the Arizona CARES Fund. Until then, I guess we can still make adjustments as we go along. That's it for me. Anything else? If not, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the tentative budget as presented. Oh, wait a minute, we gotta have a public hearing. So I'm opening up the hearing to the public. If anybody in the public wants to address the board on any issues pertaining to this particular situation, which is the tentative budget, you're welcome to make a comment or send a comment. Anybody here that wants to address the board on this particular issue? And I remind everyone that this will be two things. One is a tentative budget, and the other one is the addendum, which is now a certification form, which is an attachment to the addendum that we need to make sure that it's also motion, motions
Two
made.
different motions, so
Yeah,
right.
two different motions, okay? One is the tentative budget, and the other one is the certification form approval to be signed. Correct?
Correct. Gil Villegas has the interactive spreadsheet, if you want to go through it, but I think you pretty much understand.
If you want to go through it, no, I'm not sure that we want to go through it. I mean,
What, all that hard work?
yeah, well, that's good. That's the best kind of work, the one that, it's so inconspicuous that it's great. Anybody, I'm opening up the public hearing. Anybody in the public? If not, I'm closing the public hearing and going into the board for their decision. So the tentative budget is in front of you, board. Again, a lot of things have been discussed throughout this process. I know it's not a perfect one, but I think it includes the majority, if not all, the issues that we have previously discussed. So I'll entertain a motion for its approval.
I'll make a motion to approve the tentative budget as presented.
I'll second that.
Been motion and second to approve the tentative budget as presented. Any further discussion? No further discussion. All those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. And now I need to go back to the addendum, and I need a motion to, what's it say? To authorize, where is it? Gee, to authorize the,
I'll move to authorize the county administrator.
Second?
been motion and second to approve authorizing the county administrator to go ahead and sign the certification form as presented. Any more discussion on the motion? If not, if no more discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. I am going to move right into addendum number 2 so that we can get the recorder and elections officers out of.
I just have a comment on the budget. We've already acknowledged the good work of the budget team, and I appreciate that. But I wanted to acknowledge the board working with me. There were several items that were very important to me personally, and I appreciate the board working with me to bring those things to fruition. So I just wanted to say thank you and good job. I'm very pleased with where we ended up, so thank you.
We'll change it next year.
Yeah. I'm standing right there.
Please send the check over to P.O. Box.
All public will be available.
You also would need to set the date for the public hearing on the adopted budget for June 22nd.
Okay, so the motion will include setting the date of June 22nd as the date set for the final approval of the budget.
Public hearing.
For the public hearing for final approval,
Thank you.
right? Record that, Christie. I think
Doing
we
it right
meant
now,
that.
thank you.
All right, so we have addendum number 2, which is the recorder and elections pursuant to Arizona revised statutes, authorize the election services director to hold a public meeting on June 1st, 2020 to determine by drawing the ballot position order for 7 candidates for the office of precinct committeeman for the Republican Party. As such office has more candidates at their positions whom have filed nomination petitions as of April 6, 2020.
Can we do item number 2 first, where we
Okay, all right,
cancel
but,
certain elections?
okay, I'm going to, there's a hearing on that one. So let me open up item number 2 and deal with it at the same time.
Thank you.
So I have item number 2, which is to cancel the August 4, 2020 elections for precinct committeemen in the Democratic Party for all precincts except precinct 39, and cancel elections for precinct committeemen in the Republican Party except precinct 12 and 39. Appoint and deem elected all individuals who filed nomination petitions, papers for precinct committeemen in the respective precincts as listed in attachment A. So that means that you're first canceling all those elections where there wasn't more than the number of required candidates for the required offices.
That is correct.
And the second part of that would be to set a drawing for ballot positions, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's take the first one on, which is to cancel all elections for precinct committeemen for both Democratic Party and Republican Party, except precincts 12 and 39, and appoint all those elected, deemed elected as all individuals who filed nomination petitions for precinct committeemen in their respective precincts. Do I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
There's been a motion by a Democratic board member and a second by a Republican board member. Choose whichever.
I take it back.
Yeah. This is a very bipartisan canceling of elections. I don't want anybody to take excess credit for it. So, any more discussion? If no more discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries, and we go back, and let me just again open the public hearing for this. There is a public hearing. Does anybody here in the public want to address the board on this particular elections issue? If not, then we'll go back to the drawing, right?
You ready?
Ready?
I'm ready.
You're ready when you're ready. So you
I
start
didn't
reading.
know who you wanted to, I was gonna have.
Ah,
Chairman.
Lynn is fine. She's got a
I'm
mask.
gonna do it there and just call the names. I'll put the order on this list I have.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
This is not an election. This is just to,
Put them
come
in
up
order.
with
of
the
how
order
they're
on the
gonna be
ballot.
Order on the ballot. Okay.
Okay, here we go. Trey Ward. William Reaganhart.
How many
to
how many
William
positions?
J. Regenhard.
How many positions were there?
There were, it's a vote for 6, and there were 7 candidates who filed
Yeah, all right,
petitions,
so
and
there
then
were
there were
7
more who
candidates, 6
filed write-in
positions.
petition, or nomination.
Okay. Robert Greg Ward.
3.
Jim Slater.
4.
Mary Lou Slater.
5.
Jody Ward. Connie Uribe.
7. So the order will be Trey Ward, William Regenhart, Robert Ward, Jim Slater, Mary Lou Slater, Jody Ward, and Connie Uribe.
Which precinct is this?
39.
What happened to 12?
Well, there were a couple of candidates, but not the number to vote for as far as petitions go, but there were write-in nomination papers that put it over the limit. These individuals actually filed
Regular.
petitions, yes.
Regular petitions.
Yes.
So in precinct 12, there are more candidates than positions, but some of them are write-in.
Correct. So we didn't have to
So
do
you
the
didn't have to
draw.
go through that
Right.
because, okay, all right,
And
got it.
then for the Democratic Party, the 39, precinct 39, there were no no petition candidates, but there were more than the number to vote for of write-in candidates, so we couldn't draw.
Okay, all right, all right. Okay, now we have the list and we have the drawing sequence. Do I hear a motion to approve the drawing results?
So moved.
Your second?
Second.
Been a motion and a second to approve the drawing results and the, the drawing sequence for candidates on precinct 39. Any more discussion? If no more discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, let me go back to the regular agenda, which takes us to, we had the special session for the budget. So we have number 5, County Administration, discussion and possible action regarding the following legislative items. And it would be A, a report to the Board of Supervisors regarding the proposed bills in the Arizona State Legislature with impact to Yuma County, and the update regarding strategies relating to federal legislative priorities and action to approve the policy priorities for the NACO virtual annual business meeting to be held on July the 20th. And I'm going to open up item number 6, which is County Administration and, where's Diana? Oh, okay. Well, then I'm gonna wait until she comes back. All right, go ahead, Paul.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Paul Melcher, Director of Economic Development and Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Chair, I'd start with the state legislative update. At 9 o'clock, the LPC for CSA, which is the Legislative Policy Committee, meets, and there will be a comprehensive review of all the state legislative status. I think there's, as you mentioned earlier, since both houses or both legislature have adjourned sine die, then it puts us in that position where we're still unsure on the status of several of the bills, what went to the governor's desk, how that would be that process. So we'll be looking forward to that update on Friday. Mr. Chair, I'd move on to the federal items. As you just mentioned, the NACO work meeting is scheduled for the 20th of July. That's supposed to take place at the annual conference. I just received word this morning about the policy procedures because, as you know from the several NACO conferences that we've attended and put forward legislative proposals for the American policy consideration, the last 3 years we put together policy recommendations for the federal tax intercept program, for SCAP, and then for H-2A improvements to the application process and the consideration for extended visas. What we have now is we have the HR 5038, which is currently in the Senate, that takes place of our recommendations for the H-2A program improvements. We've dropped, as a legislative consideration, the federal tax intercept, pending on what the Arizona Office of the Courts would like to do for future years. So that really leaves us with the justice and safety for the state criminal alien assistance program. The NACO provided word this morning that they have not considered or not proposed how they're going to deal with the legislative proposals this year. They're still working through the process for the voting aspects of the working meeting, because as you can imagine, it would be very difficult for all of those persons to be identified who are the eligible voters who might participate in an online meeting. So until NACO staff comes up with the protocols that they're going to use for the voting system, they have not allowed any of the legislative policy recommendations to go forward. However, I wanted to put this forward before the board because this is our typical cycle where NACO would be requesting that somewhere around mid-June to have those policy proposals handed in for consideration at the various committee levels. So, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to present this to the board as a quick update. Essentially, this is a repeat of what we put forward, but I wanted to give you the updated numbers. The Sheriff's Office is able to provide me updated numbers. So as you can see down below, we still have a $10.8 million deficit from what we actually bill and what we receive for this assistance program. So that leaves us with about a 7.5% reimbursement rate. At the state level, it's slightly worse because we're still looking at a deficit of over $358 million with a reimbursement rate of 6.9%. So, Mr. Chair, in short, given the fact that we have knocked off 2 of the 3 items that we usually put forward for the NACO consideration, I'd like to put this to the board for its consideration. And if the NACO does actually have a policy review process, that we would put this one forward and continue to advocate for its approval.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes?
Paul, you can just go and pull one from 10 years ago and use that.
They're the same, huh?
The federal legislative agenda.
Because we've been trying to do
Oh,
it
yes,
for
Mr.
10
Chair.
years.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm trying to make
too,
a statement.
Okay.
Very frustrating. But literally, you could pull one from 10 years ago, and it's going to be the same.
Well, Mr. Chairman and Supervisor McLeod, we have been working on this issue.
It's not your fault.
No, I understand. You know, at least for the 5 years that I've been the deputy, and I'm not sure how many years before that where we've been formally submitting this. Yeah, I know it's been one of those topics that we've been bringing up also during our Hill visits. So
Each one of them.
Yep.
Year after year after year.
Okay. Anybody have any more direction other than those ones? If not, then thank you very much. What, you going to continue? Or?
Mr. Chair, if you would just make that a motion, please, to approve putting forward the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program as one of the legislative.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and second to add that to our legislative priorities, the ASCAP program. Any more discussion on this item? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're
I have
welcome.
one quick just announcement or an update for federal legislation. We've been continuing to work on the improvements to H2A, which were done via the House Bill 5038. We have a couple meetings this week to try to see from the Senate standpoint how that might look moving forward. As you might have expect, the COVID and all the stimulus discussion has kind of put some of these bills on the back burner, but we know that this is very important moving forward because we'll have another harvest season coming forward. There'll be new applications for H2A, and there were some really big improvements that we were requesting as part of the process as this bill moved through the Senate. So I'll keep the board updated on how those move forward and go from there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, Mr. Chairman, that'll take care of it.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Paul, and just stick around. So the next item is County Administration and Health, discussion and possible action regarding COVID-19 updates and activities. I've asked this to be put in the agenda because I kind of feel like, we need to acknowledge somehow some of these activities that are going on regarding COVID-19. I would like to take the opportunity, and I think that the Health Department would probably second on this, that the fact that the governor removed the stay-at-home order didn't mean that you could just simply go out and do anything you wanted to, that there still is an emergency called for Yuma County, and that, if things, and I know things aren't, looking too bright right now, we need to remind people that this isn't, normal. This isn't, we're just because, the restriction's not in place doesn't mean that we should have put our guard down. I don't think right now we have hit the peak yet here in Yuma County, and the numbers certainly bear that analysis. So with us is the Yuma County Health Director, Diana Gomez, to give us sort of an update. But before you begin, I want to tell you, we appreciate all the work you guys have put out. Not only you, but every nurse and every emergency doctor, technician, everybody that is, putting their efforts out and that are facing this situation hands-on, head-on. It's worthy of our appreciation and support, and we just want to make sure that we don't forget to say that every time we have a chance. Go ahead, Diana.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Reyes, members of the board. Diana Gomez, Director of Public Health. I'll start by giving you some numbers. So today, we update our numbers at 3, so this is going to increase. So the last count, we had 1,137 positive cases. We had 10,991 tests administered as of this morning. So when you see the dashboard, when you look at the Arizona Department of Health Services and you see that we've almost done 11,000 tests, those are tests that are confirmed either positive or negative. Those don't include pending numbers. So that's a very impressive number to have conducted that many tests. Because I follow the comments, and I know sometimes people have a lot of questions about the data we put up there. So I'm hoping to answer those today. But I see that as a comment because people say, why aren't they reporting pending? Or and so I want people to know that 11,000 is confirmed. So those 11, the ones that came back positive are the ones that we've recorded as positive. The rest were negative. And you take that into account and you realize that we have had 3 major blitz events, and we just had another one this week. So we continue to have that number of tests go up, which is a good thing. The unfortunate side is that we've had 16 deaths. So I didn't catch the comment earlier. But somebody asked about why they don't match. So the data that we report and the data in the ADHS dashboard is not going to match because we report them as we get them in. So our number is always going to be higher. We update our numbers at 3 p.m. They update their numbers 9 a.m. So their numbers are already updated for the day. We will push an update at 3. So our numbers, we're counting cases that are coming in throughout the day up until our cutoff. So those numbers, and people shouldn't, I know that causes some distress, but that's why they don't match. It's not hiding of any information. Now with the death data, again, that doesn't always match. We are the county registrar for vital records. So when there is a death, you might hear that a death is reported, and right now we have 16. Those are 16 confirmed deaths. They're confirmed through our disease surveillance system. They're also confirmed through our death certificate data. We have another one that's pending, which will bring us, once we verify that, will bring us up to 17. So again, when you have people that pass away and it's reported, for example, another source reports, we have that many deaths, that may be true. But until it's verified to death certificate data, the cause of death cannot be determined to be COVID-19, or what the public doesn't see, or the entity maybe where the reporting does not report, is the fact that, because they don't have to, is the fact that maybe that was a resident of another jurisdiction. So in our case, we've had 2 residents that were here, they were seeking treatment, but their residence was in Mexico. So we transferred those cases. Those are considered binational cases. So that explains 2 of the death discrepancies. That could also happen with Imperial County or any other jurisdiction. So those numbers are not going to, when this is hopefully over and we look back, we'll go back and we'll make sure, what was a multi-jurisdictional case. There might be a case missing here or there, but there is no attempt to suppress data. There's no attempt to not report the information. It's just a matter of our responsibility is to report verifiable data. So rather than push something out that's not verified, we will wait. And once it's confirmed, it'll be reported. So again, those are reportable numbers. So in that age group, we've had the majority of our deaths have unfortunately been in the age group of 65 and over, which is unfortunately the highest risk category and what we expected to see. So those are people that have had underlying conditions or complications But let's be clear, this is not a disease, a virus that affects people, only in one category. We said from the very beginning that the majority of people would have mild, so up to 80% of people would have mild or no symptoms whatsoever. That has held to be true. Now we know that asymptomatic people that don't show any symptoms, can be responsible for spreading to 40 to 50% of the infections. Okay? The COVID virus transmission period, so the time when your infection or you can show symptoms can range anywhere from 5 days after you become exposed and contracted the virus to 14 days. That's why you hear that 14-day. But you see those cases where I said 80% are mild, right, or no symptoms. So approximately 40%, half of those have no symptoms whatsoever. The other 40% have very mild symptoms. So that's the 80%. 20% will require some sort of medical intervention because they will have severe symptoms. This might include complications, hospitalization, and then because there's complications, that 20% is in that period where, that recovery period is going to be longer. The interventions needed are going to be more substantial. The rest of the people, for the most part, go get tested, maybe visit their doctor, and then recover at home. So that was the thing. So right now, the focus of the health department is to continue to provide PPE acquisition. That has been the goal since day one. We prepare for things like this, and I don't think even with preparedness, nobody anticipated the scope and the length that we'd be having this conversation and dealing with this. So yes, this virus is here. We have not hit our peak yet. The numbers are still climbing. We expect to report another, when I left this morning, we were counting close to 100 new cases today. So it's continuing to spread. We talked about community transmission back in April. Community transmission was when we were first unable to detect a case and epi-link it back to travel or to a contact associated with travel. At that point, we said, community transmission is here, you are at risk, you need to take the necessary precautions. So we're working on that right now. PP acquisition continues to be a primary, issue for us. Luckily, some of the supplies chains have begun to open up. We've also received PPE from the state, which we've pushed out to our first responders and medical providers and nursing facilities. There's 2 types of testing going on in the county right now. The tests that I reported to you primarily are PCR tests. Those are the swab tests that you hear about. Those swab tests are testing for active infection. So it's the active infection. It shows that you're currently infectious, you're infectious with a virus. The second type is serology tests, and those are what we call the antibody tests. So that is a blood test that very specifically tries to identify the presence of antibody to a coronavirus. So those are the 2. Now, testing positive for antibodies does not necessarily mean that you have immunity. This is a novel disease. It means you've been exposed at some point. We can't tell how long ago it was. Typically, it takes your body with other viruses, the ones we know about, anywhere between 1 to 3 weeks to develop immunity. That's why when we tell you to get your flu shot, we say it takes about 2 weeks to kick in. So you might have been exposed and been tested for antibodies, and if it hasn't been within that 1 to 3 week window, your test might come back negative. So, okay, let's see what else. The rise in numbers, again, you alluded to that. It's important that people continue to take those precautions. We're all wearing masks today. I realize how incredibly difficult that is. It is difficult not to touch your face. It's a difficult process, and none of us thought we'd have to do it this long. Social distancing is hard. These recommendations are layered approaches. They're meant to complement each other. They're meant to protect the people that are greatest at risk, because there's a great deal of people, again, that 80%, and that 40% that show no symptoms, that could transmit the virus without knowing it. So that's why we're doing this. That's why we're taking these protective measures. And I know that people have COVID fatigue, and I know it's exhausting, but we really have to continue to take these measures to ensure that we protect particularly the most vulnerable residents in our community. So seeing that, why are the numbers still rising? Okay, again, we haven't hit our peak. There's community spread, so it's everywhere. We detected our first case back in March, and it held steady, and then it started picking up. We saw big increases following the long holidays. So following the Easter weekend was when we saw our first peak. We saw it again right after Mother's Day weekend, and we're bracing ourselves for something right after the Memorial Day weekend. And if you saw, pictures across the state, you saw that, social distancing was an issue.
Out the door.
So, geographic location also plays a part. We are located in an area where we share a border with Mexico, who is also fighting their own coronavirus battle. We also share a border with Imperial County. We have a board, our borders, our residents cross back and forth. Visitors come, from both ways going, we have residents here that go to California. California residents come here. We go to Mexico. Mexico residents come here. So again, geographic location plays a role as well. And again, putting your guard down and not giving into or giving in and just being tired of the precautions and not necessarily adhering to those. So not observing the social distancing, not wearing the mask. Those are all part of layered structures. That's what we know prevents it. So again, we expect to continue to see a peak. And hopefully, in the next 2 weeks, we'll start to see a downward trend. So one of the other questions we get asked very often is, why do we not report recovered? And I know I've addressed it, but it keeps coming up. So I know why people want it. It is good news. It is positive news. It's a positive metric and what otherwise is very negative news, right? You're seeing the numbers increase. So you want some positive news. So I understand the logic behind that. The fact of the matter is that, posting, there's no standardized definition for what recovery is. That's the first thing. 80% of the cases, like I said before, don't show symptoms, may not be tested. So when you're looking at those numbers of total tests that came back positive versus recovered, that's not a true metric because you didn't capture the numbers correctly to begin with. There's also no requirement to call back and report how you've recovered or when you've recovered. And because there's no requirement, there's no way to capture it. There's no true mechanism that would allow us to give you accurate numbers. And then, how do you gauge recovery? In some places, they think after the 14-day incubation period, right? Because I just told you symptom onset is between, 5 to 14 days. But that's not a true measure either, because that just means when you're not developing symptoms. It doesn't mean you can't spread the disease. There's been instances where people who are contagious can continue to shed the virus 18 to 24 days later. So because you're not showing symptoms doesn't mean you're recovered. So that's why that's a difficult metric. Some people use recovered metric as when you discontinue the 14-day isolation. So in some instances, when you see that reported in the dashboard, the criteria is their 14-day isolation period is over. That's not really a reflection of recovered either. People need longer periods of time. It varies in length from when they are contagious or when they're recovered. In some instances, it could take up to 32 days. Well, sometimes people think, what about hospitalization? If you were hospitalized and you were released, again, that's not a true recovered metric because you can be released from the hospital, most times you are, to continue your recovery at home. So you could have been in the hospital 1 day, 2 days, 10 days, and then been released, but those people are still working every day to deal with, the illness, and so it could take a long time. But most importantly, and I think what people need to understand is recovery, though it's a good metric. It makes us feel good. We want to know. Just said 80% of the cases are mild or no symptoms. All those people technically eventually recover. The other people, even the ones that are hospitalized, recover. And unfortunately, we do have some deaths. But the information, unlike the testing, which provides us an insight as to where these cases are and how community spread is working and what the virus presence is in our community, that provides us something we could do about prevention. Okay, do we need to increase testing? Do we need to, can we loosen up some of these restrictions? Do we need to add more precautions? The recovery metric does not tell us anything about what we can do to prevent or control the spread. So that's why when you see a lot of places that don't report it, that's why I would love to report that. And at some point, that is a very resource intensive. I just told you, we reported one day, I think it was Saturday, we reported 90 cases. We do contact tracing on those. We call them, we try to determine close contacts, where they were, where that exposure happened. That is an incredibly resource intensive process. And as things continue, the numbers continue to climb, it becomes even more resource intensive. So all our resources are 100% devoted to that, to making sure we know if there's, any issues that we need to address, to know when we need reinforcements we've asked for backup, for contact tracing. So those are the things that, those are some of the reasons. And I know that, it's sometimes it's not, the news you want to hear, but that's why. There's no attempt to suppress the information. It's not that we don't want to give it to you. But if it's not accurate and not meaningful in that sense, then it's a very resource-intensive process that will not be accurate in the end, or until the end, I guess, when we look back retrospectively. We don't expect a vaccine to be available until 2021. We expect this virus to continue to, circulate, and hopefully the cases go down. For a community to develop herd immunity, you need about 60 to 70% of the population to have acquired and recovered from the disease. So it's difficult to tell, when we'll get there. And even then, it's a novel virus, so it's hard to predict how the immunity will work. So our efforts right now are being focused on, in October, we start to see flu season come in. And so our efforts right now is proactively planning for September and October and making sure that we're ahead of that flu season, making sure that we take those precautions, we provide those flu shots and just are way ahead of the game so that we can respond, to that when that happens, should there be a second surge. So the other question I get all the time is, if you test positive, if you're going to one of these blitzes, and some of these blitzes are catching, when we do our contact investigation, they're catching asymptomatic people. So it's not necessarily just people that were sick that went there, it's people that were curious, went and found out they were positive. Again, it just boosts that, that statistic about the high level of asymptomatic people. So if you're at a testing blitz, you should take precautions and stay home until you get your results, because you should assume that you're infectious, right? If you test positive, then what you need to do is you need to stay away from others for at least 10 days after your COVID testing. And this is important because it's in combination, 72 hours, so basically 3 days, after your symptoms have improved. So this includes no fever. The fever threshold we're targeting is above 104. So as long as you don't have a fever, without the aid of fever reducing medication. So if you're taking some sort of medication, that doesn't count. So again, it's 10 days from your testing and 72 hours after you have no fever and your respiratory symptoms or any other symptoms have subsided. So it's a substantial amount of time. When we do contact investigation, we identify the case and then we identify close contacts. In many cases, so if I'm the case, maybe and I live at home, maybe my husband's sick or my kids are sick, those cases recover at home unless they require some sort of hospitalization or unless they get tested, because there was a very short supply of testing, in the beginning. Those people they were sick, they recovered. They're not counted in the total count because they never received a test. So the actual amount of people that contracted the virus may be significantly higher than what we know. So the other question is, okay, what if you have somebody at home? So if you have somebody at home who tested positive, then the expectation is that you stay home as well for 14 days, because if you haven't developed symptoms, that's the span, anywhere from 5 days to those 14 days when you can develop the symptoms. You should try to limit your interaction. If you go out, you should obviously wear your mask or have the necessary precautions. And again, same thing, monitor yourself for symptoms. So then the next question is, so you have somebody at home, what if you do close contact? So I worked with somebody. And so it's the same thing. we do a contact investigation. We work with the employee notifies the employer. We try to determine what the level of exposure was. So for all intents and purposes, we see that the higher risk comes with if you've had prolonged contact with somebody for more, and prolonged for all, if you wanted to give it a number, you would say more than 10 minutes. So if I'm just passing by you, or I happen to just, say hi to you on the way in, very low risk versus, I'm sitting next to you all the time, we're sharing items. So if that's the case, then we want to encourage you to get tested. And then again, monitor your symptoms for 14 days. But again, the exposure risk, we've had some instances where businesses release press releases, talking about employees that tested positive. In those instances, at least in the first two where it was restaurants and a grocery store, there was no link to any case from the public. So those entities closed at an abundance of caution. And again, in times like this, they were just being extra cautious and just trying to do the best thing for their employees and for the public. So that is the guidance for people when you test positive. So again, the last blitz we had was this Saturday. It was by Sunset. It was on their Avenue B location to give you some sort of perspective on what the numbers look like. Each of those sites of the testing blitz normally does about 300 tests. So that one, like 2 weekends ago when we had YMC, Sunset, and Regional Center test, we had over 1,000 tests that weekend. We also have entities like Regional Center that are testing on drive-up testing capacity during the week. So those are the numbers. If you go through the ADHS dashboard and you see, you click on Yuma County, you will see our number of cases. You'll see a number of deaths. You will see the infectious rate, which has hovered between 9 and 10%. It's at 10% right now. You will also be able to see zip code data. So we get that question a lot. So if you click on the zip code, it will take you to a GIS map, and that GIS map will let you hover, and it'll let you see the number of cases per municipality, per zip code. Early on during the infection, if there wasn't a lot of cases, they were suppressed. So it was ranges, 0 to 5, 5 to 10. That is no longer an issue for us, unfortunately. So you can actually hover on that. You can click on the link, hover over, and get an idea of where you're at. So again, it's important that, yes, we all want to get back to a normal. The stay-at-home guidance has been lifted, but we still have to be responsible. And it's important that we observe some of this guidance, I guess, to not just protect, we've been really fortunate that, especially in the younger demographic, people tend to bounce back. But we need to be personally responsible and take that accountability and do that, even if it's awkward and not what we want to do for those people who are at the highest risk. And as you can see, we've had deaths in other demographic age groups. And those are the people we're trying to protect. Those are the people that, will face challenges. And those are the people that, we have to take those extra precautions for, because even if you don't feel like you're sick, you might actually be transmitting the disease. So it's a lot to take in. It's a lot of information, but I would be happy to answer your questions for you.
Supervisor McLeod?
What are you finding out from the serology tests of people that go in? What percentage?
So the serology test is still early on. We don't, the issue with the serology test is that depending on when your exposure was, so far we don't have a high percentage coming back positive. Part of that, I think, is because it depends on when you get tested. Like I said, it could take 1 to 3 weeks to develop the antibodies. But more importantly, serology testing, right now, you as an independent person, as a private person, can ask your doctor for a serology test. And they can write at the lab, and you can go to a lab and get it. I know that Sonora Quest does that. But the majority of the serology testing that's happening in our community right now is being sponsored by the University of Arizona. They are conducting a research study. They're working with Yuma Regional Medical Center and Regional Center for Florida Health to conduct this. At this time, that particular research study is only open to first responders, peace officers, law enforcement, and first-line healthcare workers. So that data has not, we don't have access to that data yet. But if you look at the dashboard, they'll report it. They'll start reporting it. If you scroll all the way to the bottom of the ADHS dashboard, we'll see it. But it's not capturing a picture, at least not in our community yet, of the general population because it's not available to the general public. So that picture is still really fuzzy.
Thank you.
All right. Any other
Mr.
questions?
Chair? Diana, have they gotten the test results back from the prison?
So,
Yeah.
so with the prison, that's an ongoing process. We haven't reported any new cases in our count. Two things were happening at the prison.
Mm-hmm.
One was the Arizona Department of Health Services was going to start an initiative where they were going to conduct testing. The second is we had a local agency, Regional Center for Border Health, that was working to provide testing for the staff. So when it's an inmate that tests positive, the follow-up is conducted by it's a state facility, so it's conducted by the state. So the numbers that we would get would be, we reported early on some numbers. I think at that point, maybe 3 weeks ago, we had 30 cases in inmates that we had reported. We mostly would deal with a contact investigation for the staff working at the facility, the employees. So we haven't gotten any additional data on the inmates.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Sure, Supervisor.
Yes.
When you say reach the peak, I mean, how can we reach the peak when there's so many people out there that find out probably positive and that they don't get tested, they don't know that they have it, so, and they're running around with, mask, without the mask and just being everywhere.
And that's the problem with data. When we talk about peak, it's just the number of tests that we've conducted, where the highest number has been, and when we start seeing a slope in tested people, to your point. And that's the issue. Yeah, that's the issue with the data, that we have community spread. That's why we're seeing the high numbers. We also have increased testing capacity. That's why we're also catching a lot. That's the good point. Mm-hmm. So to your point, it's just the definition of when those that have been tested, when we start seeing a decrease in testing numbers. And that's the problem with the data sometimes,
So that the peak is the testing.
Yes,
because
sir.
There's a misconception. People think, well, if it starts going down, that means the virus is no more people with
You're correct. And because it is testing, as you said, suppose tomorrow we stop testing. We'll have a very steep decline. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And those are the numbers. When you look at the numbers, it's important to have numbers. They help us make decisions. They help us make informed decisions, but they don't tell the whole story. To your point, you're exactly right. And so when people are like, why aren't you reporting this? Why aren't you? It's because it sometimes it doesn't tell the true picture. Right now, we have community spread for every person. We've had households where one person was tested. Everybody showed the symptoms. Let's say there was 4 or 5 people in the house. We know they were all contagious. They self-quarantined. They recovered. But those numbers weren't captured. Mm-hmm.
Just the one.
Just the one. Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, the most important numbers are the hospital. The idea was to flatten the curve. So the idea was to not overwhelm the health system. Mm-hmm. So as long as the hospital is reporting they have enough space and the hospital is reporting they have enough ventilators and they have enough treatment room, ICUs. As long as they say they're okay, and as long as that surge system works, I think we're going to be okay. We're just going to go through this stage of testing. I mean, how do you ask for a recovery rate when you don't know who had it to begin with? Right. I mean, those people had it and recovered. They continue their life, right? So it's really difficult. And I understand the difficulty of your job. And from the latest that I've heard from you, the problem is going to be tracing. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a heavily time investing type situation where you have to have, not only the people to do this, but the ability to do it. And it's going to be difficult to accommodate that.
It is. It's very hard. And to your point, contact tracing is incredibly valuable in the early phases of the disease because it allows us to identify when we're getting 1 or 2 numbers 2 cases, you identify those people, you isolate them, you try to prevent that. We do that in public health for every other communicable disease. So our ability to keep up with that early on was incredibly, incredibly valuable. As the numbers, to your point, as the numbers continue to increase, that is becoming a very, very difficult task. And at some point, what we're seeing right now is that those lines, those contacts are starting to interweave. You worked here with this person who also tested positive, who was at this, particular function. And so it's important stuff that we need to continue to do, but it's getting harder and harder to keep up with that. To your first point about surge capacity, yes, all these preventive measures were put in place originally to flatten the curve. We do not want to overwhelm our healthcare system. We have one hospital. And so last week we worked with the state health department to provide a surge line. The whole purpose of the surge line is to assist hospitals in transferring patients to other facilities and to facilitate that process. So YRMC is able to do that. We continue to check in on a daily basis. Today, the numbers today was 17 hospitalized in-house as of this morning. 16 of those were in ICU. I believe this morning they had 12 ventilators in use and 35 ventilators available. And again, those numbers fluctuate. But again, the key is going to be about our ability to meet the needs of those people who are going to require critical, health needs. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a person in their 50s or 60s. We've seen people in all ranges be hospitalized and eventually released. So yes, surge capacity is going to be key. They have that in place now. And so that's going to be a metric we look at moving forward, especially when flu season hits.
Mr.
Supervisor
Chair, Diana,
Bankhurst.
I had a constituent call yesterday and was very concerned about the number of people not wearing masks. They went to 2 different places, and the number of people that just chose not to wear a mask was frightening. Are we doing anything, like any PSAs or anything that we can do to encourage people to wear masks or let them know the importance of wearing a mask? Are we handing them out? Are we doing anything that would help get that number to go up?
So we've continuously, in our updates, we push that out, the importance of wearing masks. And early on, we showed people, we had videos, links on how to make your own mask. Mm-hmm. The majority of us, all we need is we don't all need surgical mask. A cloth mask is fine. N95 masks should still only be reserved for, healthcare professionals that are working with sick patients. We want to conserve those. Those are still hard to get by. So we continue to do that messaging. We push out PPE still to healthcare providers that requested. They submit a resource request, and as we struggle to procure it too, but as we get it from either the state or because we purchased it, we fulfill those requests. So, I've had people, I'm glad you said that, because one of the questions that has come up is there was differing guidance. I think it was the World Health Organization, the CDC, about, should you wear a mask or how useful it is. And I think the World Health Organization updated their guidance to say if you're healthy, maybe you don't need to wear one unless you're sick. And there's various, we want people to wear a mask, again, because of the asymptomatic. Now, there's places where masks in other parts of the world are in short supply. They're dealing with the same thing we were dealing on early. And so the conservation at that point is for, like it was here. Originally, we just said healthcare providers, and everybody else didn't have to wear a mask. As we saw the cases spread, that guidance evolved. And that's where we're at today. We're seeing that happen in other parts of the world where they're saying, maybe only if you're sick or maybe, but that guidance, again, is continuing to evolve as they get PPE. So yes, it's important that people wear the mask, and it doesn't have to be a really restrictive one. They're readily, especially the cloth ones, are more readily available, really like your mask. You can get it imprinted with your logo for businesses, but it's important. We don't recommend that children under the age of 2 wear a mask, that become an issue. So again, and there's people that genuinely have some sort of medical condition where it's very difficult for them to wear a mask. And that's why we wear a mask, to protect those people. So
wear a mask, people.
Wear a mask.
So we're not doing any PSAs or anything like that that would encourage people to wear a mask?
Well,
like a I mean, we could
Public
increase that.
service
We've had,
announcement.
yeah, we pushed that out stuff in our daily update, but we can certainly increase our efforts. I think it's important, and we're gonna, I think it's important maybe to also bridge it from a generational standpoint. I'd like to see a public service campaign where somebody says, I'm wearing a mask for, you know, and maybe you have a picture of a parent or a grandparent or a child or a pregnant, you know, spouse or a pregnant friend. Because I think that's important. It brings context home. And, you know, I know that, you know, most of us have known somebody who's had, you know, some contact or some issue or who you've been worried for. And I think that'd be really important. So if we do a PSA, you can be the face of our first.
I want to take the opportunity.
I'm in that age group, yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
I want to take the opportunity to mention the fact that unless you didn't read the paper on Saturday or Sunday, Supervisor Portia's brother was in the hospital for over a month, and he was, you know, he was released this weekend, and I tell you that is good news, and he struggled.
Yeah.
So you know, in all the midst of everything else, I mean, it's a serious situation, and you don't have to have a family member, you don't have to have a person you know, a friend or a relative, go through that. I mean, come on, you know, wear a mask for other people. Don't if you don't think about it yourself. I mean, obviously, this is stuff. It's just it's not easy, especially when you talk a lot, like some of the supervisors. But you need to wear a mask. To protect other people you care about, people you love, because essentially, you know, it may not be you, but it could be someone you care for. So.
Right. And yeah, so we will increase that. There was concerns early on about.
It's okay. That was the signal he wants to. You know, he wants us to go
time
into
is
legal.
up. Usually
Your time
I
is
have
up.
like a 3-minute timer.
Your time is up.
But again, those are all, and so yes, I welcome increased messaging, and I think it's something that we really all need to do. And if there's anything my office can do, and you have any questions, please let me know. We'd be more than happy to follow up on it.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I forgot where was that. Okay. So now the next thing is the event calendar and current events. Board members and county administrator will report on, may discuss events attended or to be attended on behalf of the county, and may present a brief summary of current events, and may update the schedule for future board of supervisor meetings as appropriate. No legal action will be taken. Supervisor Pancrasy, we begin with you.
Yes.
Hopefully you didn't go to a large gathering of anything.
No, I've done a lot of meetings to go, or whatever they're called, they're Zooms, and I was on Senator Sentiment's call and Governor Deuce's call this last week. I attended the CSA Medium County Caucus via Zoom, and the CSA Board of Directors meetings. I attended the Yuma County Annex Phase 2 feasibility study meeting. I'm on the YMPO audit committee, and we had an audit. YMPO had an audit. They aced it. It went very, very well. I also attended the YMPO meeting, and I attended Hospice of Yuma meeting, and the GSA water transfer meeting. We had a small meeting about the issue with that the director of the ADWR, Arizona Department of Water Resources, is going to make a recommendation very soon about the transfer of water from this 465 acres in La Paz County. So we had a meeting about that. So.
Okay. Supervisor McLeod.
Sure. Attended the County Supervisors Association Executive Committee, the CSA board meeting. I was very privileged to be invited up to Governor Ducey's press conference regarding the release of the COVID-19 CARES funds that we spoke about today. I was grateful to them for that invitation. Also attended the governor's teleconference that afternoon. Yuma County Annex feasibility study, along with Supervisor Pancrasy, and the CSA legislative update. What I got.
Supervisor Simmons?
Well, that same said in a couple of telephonic meetings, attended Antelope's graduation. It was interesting the way they did it.
At least they got one.
Yeah, they did a good job with it. I think the kids got a big kick out of everybody waiting for them, giving them a big honking and everything else. And retirement board meeting at the sheriff's office.
Good. Supervisor Porches.
I also attended for right on the phone audit committee meeting for YMPO and also attended the YMPO.
Right. I had a very interesting call with the Department of Homeland Security that involved a lot of people, basically 28 participants. 15 of them were mostly federal officials. And the idea was to give us a briefing, elected officials on the border, to give us a briefing on why they were extending the restrictions, travel restrictions for people crossing the border with visas, which is the tourist type visa. They extended it from the end of May, I think it was May 21st to June 21st, to 22nd, excuse me, and they wanted us to know why, so they gave us an intelligence briefing about the federal government sees as the problems in Mexico and the issues with expatriates, people who live over there who come over here for treatment, and some surveys that taken of people crossing over and coming back, and why the long lines and the few officers, that it was a couple of hours. But suffice it to say that there was not much that we didn't know, but it gives us an opportunity to just simply highlight the difficulties that we have in terms of time crossing from Mexico and San Luis, Arizona at this particular time, and how consistent it is that the wait times in San Luis go between 3 and 5 and 6 hours, while in Calexico, the time is 10 minutes to 45 minutes. And we try to bring in the fact that if they were consistent about the restrictions, it would feel a lot better. But, it seems to me like for some particular reason, 95% of the time, the crossing in San Luis is always longer than anywhere else in the country. And I'm talking Canada and I'm talking Mexico. So just wanted to highlight that. I've also listened to Senator Sinema's reports, when she is on. We had a WAKE executive board that was handled through Zoom. And we also had a meeting of the Greater Yuma Port Authority here at the Board of Supervisors to deal with issues for them. And I don't know, I can't even read my writing anymore, so I'm going to stop right there. I wanted to talk about the mayor. I have called, sometimes I think we get caught up in this negative thing where we just simply listen to all the negative news and, we kind of get caught up in the situation. There are some positive things that are happening. I was really pleased about how the local government in San Luis, the mayor and the people in San Luis were able to handle the DES long lines, and they were able to provide them with masks and distancing and shade. And although this morning I looked at the line and it was against the wall because that was where the shade was, and you put up shade, and if there's no shade there, people move to where there's shade, where there's a tree or something. But they put up a great effort, and I think that it helps that the mayor of San Luis, Arizona is a physical assistant, and he works in the healthcare field, that he understands probably better than anyone else just how the health crisis is impacting his community. So anyway, that was, to me, I think that was it I had written down. Susan? We do have an executive meeting after this.
Yes, so I attended a video conference meeting of the CSA County Administrators Group, as well as the technical guidance for the AZ CARES Act, CARES funds provided by the OSPB, and the Yuma County Administrative Annex planning meeting, which those will continue coming up very quickly. Representative Dunn also has a meeting of Zoom call each Friday at 2 p.m. So he's restarted those. And then we had the GYPA meeting and adopted the budget for next year with the same funding level by the county.
I was able to read my notes, and I wanted to talk briefly about the curfew that the governor declared yesterday. And it's something that may or may not, I don't think it necessitates a separate, discussion as part of the reporting. I got a call yesterday about the actual order. And then I got some, comments from John and some comments from the sheriff and some comments from our local officers here. So I just want to make sure that the people of Yuma County know that the curfew applies statewide, from what I've read, but that it leaves enough space in there for people who are actually doing something, doing something that they have to justify, I guess, being out there after 8 p.m. But I do want to make sure that people in Yuma County understand this is more than anything the result of all the difficulties that bigger cities are experiencing, including Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Tucson, regarding the demonstrations that have happened over the last few days on the death of Mr. Floyd. So, just if you're going to be outside after 8 o'clock, just have a reason to be outside. Do not just linger places and just go out there and just be out there. We're living a pretty difficult time, and it's, I think that not only do we have the COVID-19 situation that really you shouldn't be out there unless you have something to do, but you also have a situation where some of these demonstrations have gotten to a point where they become unruly, and there's a lot of looting and destruction out there. So please, if you don't have to be out there after 8 p.m., don't be. And if you're out there, please have a reason to be out there, okay? At least for the week that I think it was a week, wasn't it?
Yes.
For at least a week. Don't give our law enforcement more work than they need, okay? All right, now I'll entertain a motion or I'll do a motion to enter into executive session. Do I hear a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion, a second to go into executive session. I'm going to ask that anyone that doesn't have to be here, in other words, just the attorneys and us remain in this place, or, while we do this, and, to cut the feed. Oh, well, okay, well.
Adjourn immediately after.
All right, it was a motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Okay, I wanted to try to clear the room before we voted on it. But, please, if you don't have to be here for this item, please, just excuse yourselves. We'll be back after this, maybe 15 minutes. And
Bye, Diana, thank you. I do want to
please cut the live feed on TV.